Apologies, people. We're just going to take another few minutes while we finalise the revised wording of the recommendations. Thank you. Okay, we're ready to proceed. I'll call the room back to order. Could I have everybody facing the centre of the room, please? Thank you. We're now moving on to item 10.4, Council's Corporate Emissions Reduction Target, a much anticipated report amongst many in our community. So I'll pass over to Miriam Randall and Ninka to present this report. Thank you.
No. Kia ora koutou, ko Miriam toku ingoa, ko te kaitohu tohu toitu tanga. I am the Sustainability Advisor for Kapiti Coast District Council, and I am here today to present the report that you have in front of you. This report went to the Climate and Environment Subcommittee on the 15th of June, and it was discussed vigorously, and the outcome of that report setting was that we had some additional recommendations put forward by that subcommittee, and these have been added into the original report, and they appear under the recommendations G and H. And alongside these recommendations, there is also paragraphs 25 to 31 that have been added with some commentary around those recommendations that have come from the subcommittee. So I would like to take the report as read beyond that. Perhaps before I do that and open the floor up to questions, I did just want to note that we had uploaded into the hub a graph which you may or may not have all seen. I just thought I'd take an opportunity to give a little bit of explanation around it. You may already be quite familiar. It was reported in February in a update briefing, but essentially it just gives a visual representation of the council's organisational carbon emissions, and the grey is predominantly our category 1 and 2 that will remain. Those emissions will remain in our inventory out into the future at this stage. The green is what we see as the Three Waters emissions. So the green and the orange are going to come under some different emissions reporting criteria as the Three Waters reform continues. So we just want to note that that's going to change the way that the emissions from council look in the future. But then also noting that we're going to have this addition of category 3 to 6 emissions coming in, and that is going to essentially mean that the total amount of emissions in that near term is going to jump up a lot. And so we just wanted to give you an idea of why that is, and so you can see the difference of what's going and what's coming in. So hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
With that graph, just before I take questions, can that be added as an appendix to the agenda and online so that people can see that, seeing as it's been referenced in this meeting?
It was presented on a non-public meeting, and the reasons for that is it's basically, if people take it like fact, it could be debatable because it clearly says in the text box, there are some crude estimates in there. With the first tool that was provided, we did a crude estimate based on value only for the blue bars, for example, category 3. So there is a difference between audited outcomes and crude estimates. They're in the same graph to help tell the story.
Yeah.
So I would be a bit hesitant, but I guess if we make that really clear.
Yeah, I think in the interest of transparency, seeing as referred to that graph today, that but as long as we make that clear,
yeah, we will have
maybe
to
make that bit bigger font, that particular piece of information, that it's an estimate graph, it's not an audited.
Yes.
Yeah. Not as factual as Mark's report.
No, exactly.
Councillor Warwick.
I've just got one question on page 114 to that only full EVs are added to the council's light vehicle fleet. So we're dealing with emissions, but what about waste with the batteries? Have we considered the battery life and the end of life battery problem in that? Because there's a lot of talk now of EVs not being maybe the go-to, but it's the waste that I'm concerned about at the end of it.
Yes, this is a worldwide discussion because the focus is so much on let's all buy EVs and save the planet. It's just one of the things you can do. That's the same for council. And yes, you do consider it. In New Zealand, there's actually good information and research available that because New Zealand has such a high percentage of green energy, as opposed to the rest of the world, this is probably the only country where it makes sense to drive an EV, because you have a footprint when you make an EV, and you have a footprint at the end when you need to recycle or dispose of batteries and those kinds of things. In between, those emission footprints are largely offset by driving that car in a country where you have mostly renewable energy. So in that sense, the footprint is not larger in New Zealand's case than of a normal fuel car when you look at the whole life cycle picture of an EV. There is actually one recycling outfit in Auckland that does recycle car batteries. I think they're expanding quite quickly because car batteries going forward quite fast can actually be used to heat your house. They have large battery systems, and you can actually, via your solar, use your car battery as a battery to then heat your house in the evening. So that technology is definitely on the way. There's quite a lot published online on the various forums and pages talking about that. But I don't know exactly the detail of the status. I just know it's all under development. Yeah.
Do you have a further question, Councillor Warwick? So hang on, just wait for the microphone. Okay. Just to note as well, from the chair that that recommendation is only a suggestion for council to consider, and these questions could be answered during that process. It's not a commitment at this stage. Councillor Kirby.
Thank you. I just have a question in regards to point 31, which is, I know, one of your feedback comments in relation to our subcommittee's recommendations. So point 31, which is related to our SME contractors reducing their emissions. Do we have any idea on the acceptance level within our small and medium businesses in Kapiti for the level of extra cost and work that's involved in these emissions in our process around this?
I'm not too sure I understand your question, Councillor.
I guess what we're signalling, what I'm trying to say is we're signalling here that we're going to work with our small and medium enterprises, that's one of the suggestions, to reduce their emissions. I'm wanting to get an idea of, do we have an idea what sort of willingness there is within our business community in Kapiti to take on the extra work and the extra cost that potentially is involved with this?
So just for clarification, my understanding of what is being discussed in this point is more around when we are contracting small to medium-sized businesses to do work for the council, we would be asking for a certain level of carbon reduction activity to happen in the projects that they plan to do for us. We wouldn't be forcing businesses to reduce their emissions as a business that they operate for themselves. Obviously, that's a great thing for them to do, and we would try to support them to do that if that was something that they were wanting to do. But it's more in how we contract their services for the work that we want. Yeah. Does that clarify?
Yes, but in an ideal world, they would separate their work from council with the rest of their work. I think if we're requiring it, they're going to have to put it into everything that they do, because generally the work they're doing for us is work that they do normally. So I think to separate those two, in my opinion, would be, it doesn't
So we are
fit logic.
straying a little bit into
Yes.
the debate here, and we're
Yeah.
discussing a part of the agenda which is, as I pointed out to Councillor Warwick, a section which is about suggestions for pieces of work that could be looked into in the future.
Yep.
And potentially the questions that you're raising would be addressed during that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Happy to take that. Thank you.
I'd just like to point out too that we do already support small and medium businesses quite extensively in reducing their carbon footprints. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through the chair. Look, first, very quick comment. I just wanted to appreciate officers' work in this space and acknowledge that they are doing this really in a limited resources environment, and this is just another place that government really should be stepping up. My first question, I just want a bit of clarity here. This is us in regards to council's corporate emissions reduction target. So I guess in reference to what Councillor Kirby was talking about, that would be a separate piece of work. This particular piece of work is around our corporate emissions. Is that correct?
Yes, it focuses on audited emissions reductions through the TOI2 certification program that we're part of. So it focuses fully on organizational emissions.
So I'm just curious. I appreciate that we're talking about reductions, baselines, and having reduction targets. But really, isn't our ultimate goal to get to zero? Shouldn't this perhaps be more of a pathway to zero rather than a emissions reduction target as such? Am I off track in that line of thinking?
I guess the projects we are proposing to get to 85.5% is your roadmap. That is how we are going to get to that target. So a pathway. It's our organizational pathway. Yes.
And this is a legislated requirement, is it, to be at that 85%?
No.
And this is our pathway to get to that?
No. So this is, the targets are a requirement for us to set under the TOI2 audit program. And we are now required to set a separate target for direct emissions. It's category 1 and 2. And then in 2 years' time, set a new target for value chain emissions that we're only starting on now. So far in the last 12 years, all the focus has been on category 1 and 2 emissions. So this is a requirement of the TOI2 audit program we're in, but it does align with national and international best practice, because we're looking at the same type of targets
you're
that we're
saying.
working towards to. And
Yes, no,
in
sorry.
2032, we will have then achieved 85.5 reduction in our emissions, and then we get to the insetting and offsetting bit of it to get to zero.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what I'm alluding to perhaps will involve a bit more conversation, which will, I guess, be included as we evolve this piece of work. Happy to perhaps address it more in line there. A couple of other things. I noticed when we were talking about EVs, we were talking about replacing our vehicle fleet with EVs only. I'm just wondering, should we be putting an allowance there for other options other than EVs? I appreciate what we're talking about is reducing our emissions from a carbon perspective, but as other technologies come online, I wouldn't want us to be cut out, if you like, with regards to considering them. EVs is a current option, but in the next couple of years, there might be other technologies that come out as well. Do we need to make allowance in our wording here to cover that?
So, Councillor Halliday, I believe the allowance is made there in the wording, which only acknowledges that these are suggestions for the council to look into potentially in the future. So those kind of questions would be addressed if we decided to consider this as a piece of work.
Right, okay. I found the wording actually to be quite specific.
Okay. So H says that the climate, hang on, Councillor Halliday. Recommendation H says that the Climate and Environment Subcommittee identifies the following as possible future initiatives that could be considered by council.
Thank you very much for that correction.
Yeah, thanks. Any further questions?
I do have a couple more. When we're talking about vehicle swaps or what we class as a light vehicle, what is considered a light vehicle in this space? Is it by weight? The reason I note that is that we've talked about I note there's a rubbish truck that we're looking at with regards to electrifying that. I'm conscious. So is that considered a light vehicle as such, or are we talking about more of our, should we say, corporate fleet of smaller cars as such?
The Chief Executive is going to attempt to answer that.
Thanks, Councillor Halliday. I think the intent of the document and the recommendations are for us to think strategically, as opposed to what definitions of vehicle types might be per se. That being said, light vehicles across fleets have various definitions, so that would be something for the fleet manager to work through.
Thank you for that response. I think the key word there was intent, and I think I've been taking this a little bit more literally than I should be, so I do appreciate that correction. My only other comment would be, in regards to us meeting our targets, are things like native planting, etc., are they able to be used, if we build that up over the years, to help in the offsetting side of things?
Yes, sequestration does come into play, and we have briefed council previously twice on the sequestration options being quite limited for council. We are only an owner of 29 hectares in this district, of which most is not able to be planted out, even if we wanted to. We have to be able to meet the ETS rules to register our forestry for sequestration and carbon credits. There are some minimum requirements in there that are not that easy to meet. We've only got a few that meet the hectares needed, for example. But this is something we will work on with the open spaces, and I see it as part of our open spaces team planting program, which is already in place, to enhance that where we can, so that by the time we get to 2032, we also have registered sequestration underway where possible. So yeah, we're working on that.
Thank you very much. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. Community Board Chair Bede Larissy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. I think a yes, no will probably suffice here. Recommendation B, organisational emissions of net zero emissions by 2050. Am I right? Is my memory correct that council passed a motion a while back saying that district-wide emissions would be net zero by 2040, or would explore that as an option. Is that right?
Yes, there was a briefing on the 28th of February with public present where there was a lively discussion about a district-wide emissions target. It's distinctly different from organizational emissions, though, I have to say. So it's a different discussion. This needs to be an audited outcome for organizational emissions. The district-wide target has not been formally set by council. So that is still under development and up for debate in the near future.
I've got a follow-up question to that. If council decided to set an aspirational target of 2040, would that impact on our participation in the Toitu program or our audited piece of work?
At the moment, I would say no. Toitu does require council to set realistic targets. So the 2032 target, for example, is a calculated target. We've looked at these projects, we did emissions estimates, we counter-checked the achievements we propose with Toitu, and they have approved for us to say, yes, we know you can support your target to actually meet it. The 2050 target is a target which is a science-based target, which is the same approach as is done internationally, nationally, and regionally. They are more erring on the side of aspiration, I would say. It is still best practice to adopt it, to signal that you're working towards a net zero position. So if council was proposing to go earlier, I guess it just needs to be part of the ongoing discussion with Toitu while we're developing our scope 3, the indirect emissions, whether or not that is achievable and needs to be reconsidered within that time frame.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper?
Just a couple of questions. One is just a question around recommendation H, that the use of fossil gas be eliminated across all council activities by January 2026. Is that even a remote possibility of occurring, or even close to occurring?
The very honest answer is no.
Okay. Would
Yeah,
that
again,
even be remotely by, would 2030, would it be even remotely?
Before 2032, yes.
Okay, so that would include chainsaws and emergency generators, weed eaters.
So I'll point out again that this is one of the recommendations, which is a suggestion for council to look into.
Yeah.
So those questions would be answered.
Yeah,
if
or just
council
in order
decided do
to
that.
look into that, I'm asking the question to make my decision whether I should support it or not. So does that include lawnmowers and weed eaters and chainsaws? Are they
It
possible?
did not, when it was suggested, this recommendation was put in during the previous meeting, and it was focusing on fossil fuel gas for buildings. And the comments that have been put in paragraph, let me just check where that is, the paragraphs that give some feedback on those suggested focus on buildings. So we're talking about pools, council halls, and sports grounds.
So I'll just be clear,
Okay.
in terms of supporting this motion, you are noting, the council is noting that the Climate and Environment Subcommittee identified these as possible future activities. So we're just acknowledging that they've identified them as a suggestion that we could look into.
Yep.
We're not supporting them or not today.
But we've just heard that they're not possible. Okay, that's for me to just decide, I guess, and others.
Yeah,
Just a
absolutely.
quick question in relation to number 12, page 116. The only way to achieve carbon neutrality by 2025 would be to purchase a large amount of carbon credits, and that would be in perpetuity. And then on 13, it's proposed that the council's to zero is to do exactly that, either buy forests or purchase carbon credits. So that would be in perpetuity as well?
From 2050 onwards, yes, but
Yes.
it's supposedly a very small amount, only 10% of remaining emissions. Whereas if you were committing to doing that for 2025 in 2 years' time, it would be a very large amount. It wouldn't stop council from still continuing to reduce further where you can and make that reduction credits that you have to purchase less.
What assumptions have been made in terms of the cost of those carbon credits or purchasing trees?
We have made those assumptions and used those in a briefing on the 28th of February. At the moment, we've decided to, in the long-term plan, look at planting together with open spaces and explore those possibilities. The carbon credits purchase discussion is very far away if this target is set for 2050. But the price of carbon credit has significantly, I think it's doubled in the last year, and it will just continue to go up.
And one last question, yes or no is fine, I guess. In terms of us trying to reduce our gross emissions, because I'm not a fan of net zero, personally, that lasts, say, 10% or 15% or 20%, whatever we get to, because it gets harder, as you acknowledge, it gets harder and harder. Would the money that we're going to spend on buying forests and sequestration, would that not be better spent around encouraging our community to lower their gross emissions and just accept that net zero is not actually the best thing for our planet? Lowering our gross emissions across our community is?
For our organizational emissions, our services are resulting in those emissions. So we would have to tell residents to stop using the pool, or, I mean, it would have to make a change in level of service. So these organizational emissions won't necessarily change with people's behavior changing. In the district-wide emissions, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. Any further questions? There don't appear to be any. Just checking online. Okay, so Councillor Handford is proposing some alternative recommendations, which she would like to move, I take it. So if we could have those up on the screen, please. Would councillors like those read out, or are we happy just to take a moment to have a look at them? Potentially I should read them out for the record. Hang on, just bring my microphone around. A, that council sets a new aspirational long-term target for its organisational emissions of net zero emissions by 2040 and emphasises the importance of taking immediate action to reduce emissions. That council sets a mid-term reduction target for its category 1 and 2 emissions of achieving further emissions reduction of 15.5% by 2032. The council notes that these further reductions are on top of the 70% emissions reductions already achieved in categories 1 and 2 emissions since 2010. The council notes that these proposed further emissions will be achieved through implementation of planned projects that are and will be funded through the current long-term plan 2021 and the long-term plan 2024. E, that council notes the Kapiti Coast District Council's organisational emissions reduction plan for 2032 in Appendix 1 of this report. F, acknowledges that simply resetting the target should not lead to a delay or lack of investment in transitioning our systems to low carbon alternatives. G, recognise that the climate crisis requires strong leadership and a commitment to urgently reduce emissions at both an organisational and community level in order to mitigate the consequences associated with rising temperatures and ecological breakdown and to foster a climate just and resilient district. Is that all of them? Okay, so that's been moved by Councillor Handford. It's being seconded by Councillor Halliday, who has just sent a message through to say that he would like to do that. Sorry, just pipped you to the post, Councillor Wilson. Maybe the meeting can note that Councillor Wilson had a desire to second this motion.
Point of order. Do we not need to move the original recommendations and then...
No, we can move whatever recommendations we want. So staff have recommended to us some motions. We can either move those or we can move our own motions, I believe. Am I right about that? Yep.
Can I just suggest that in the light of some of our discussion, we probably need to amend H as well, the current H, because we've already heard that 1 January 2026 is probably not feasible for the fossil gas being eliminated. I've also had an email from a member of our community saying, why are we not investigating EVs?
Councillor Coe, can we, at the moment we've moved A through G, and then let's take the next block, and then we'll take the next block next, just so we can get through these ones.
Sure.
So right of introduction, Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, cool. Kia ora. I won't take too much time, but just wanting to acknowledge the staff for the enormous amount of mahi that has gone into both preparing the report that came to the Climate and Environment Subcommittee and also into this report, but the ongoing mahi that's done to continue staying on top of the audit process and exploring new opportunities to reduce our emissions. And I really do acknowledge that. I also acknowledge sometimes the stress that I might put you under concerning to my passion for this topic, which I hope is met with a sense of understanding and a sense of aroha, despite the fact that these have come in rather late in the piece. So there was a rather lengthy discussion at the Climate and Environment Subcommittee meeting where this was explored, and I definitely understand the need to review the target, and that's currently set at 2025 with category 3 and 6 emissions now being included. The context has changed, we need to change with it, we need to be agile. But I think that setting a long-term target by 2040 for net zero gross emissions aligns with several important factors and considerations of our council to date. First and foremost, recognising climate action as one of our main strategic priorities for not only this year but into the future. So I think by acknowledging the urgency and significance of addressing climate change, the more that we can continue to signal to our community the importance of this, and then foster those conversations out there in the public in terms of our communities of individuals, but also businesses, schools, to take that leadership. I think that emphasising our aspiration and ambition is crucial. Being aspirational will only help us to drive innovation, to encourage collaboration, and also foster a culture of continuous improvement and continuously looking at what other opportunities might be available. If we just push it back to 2050, we may kind of not be as vigilant in that. But I do acknowledge, obviously, the work of the staff that's gone into staying on top of this to this point. Just to say that sitting back also and delaying action is no longer an option. We happen to be alive in what is one of the most crucial moments in history where we can stand up and say that action needs to happen now, and we happen to be in positions of leadership in our community where we can both signal that but then also make the necessary investment to make this stuff happen. So I think that's quite a privileged position, actually, that we have the opportunity to hold. So I guess in summary, the reason why these recommendations or these new recommendations are on the table is motivated by the strategic priorities that we've already set, a desire for leadership in the community, signalling of ambition and aspiration, and also recognition that immediate action is necessary in the midst of the climate crisis. So I would encourage you all to consider what role we have around the council table to do that. Kia ora.
Councillor Wilson.
Just to agree with all of that and add a couple more things. And this council determined in May of 2019 that there was a climate change emergency and made a big deal about that. That's 4 years ago. It hasn't got any better, so just a news flash. I think there will be some values to be gained in this space from the Wellington Regional Waste Management and Minimisation Plan and being part of that. I think that'll help. That will help us achieve some of what we want to achieve here. We have an opportunity here to aspire to something incredibly ordinary like 2050, or we have the opportunity to aspire to something that's meaningful given all of the prior decisions that have been made by this council. So if this council wants to hold to the values it held to at the time that it declared a climate change emergency, then 2040 is a far more realistic and aspirational goal, and I think we should be sticking to that. And when there were discussions around SMEs, I think I'd like to see a little more discussion around the large corporations. The waste management, for instance, up until not that long ago, was owned by the Beijing Capital Group, and they sold it to Igneo Infrastructure, which is a global asset management business. These are mega players who are in our backyard and playing in our backyard. So we need to seriously think about that as well, and the impacts that they can have, not just our local small to medium enterprises. Yes, I support what Sophie's saying completely. I think Liz is right when we come to H. 2 and H seems it's not even aspirational. This is crazy talk, but yeah, supporting that 100%.
We have Councillor Halliday online.
Thank you, through the chair. Certainly support all the comments just made, and Nigel makes very good points with regards to other players in our district. But what we're talking about here is internal with KCDC. Look, in my opinion, these targets are moving targets at best. New technologies will be developed, new legislations will be introduced, and there's a new local government structure which will come into existence. Point in case is, an upcoming scenario where our councils are going to be having to deliver rubbish collection in-house, which I assume will also pick up associated emissions. That's just an example. Are we aspirational? We have been through this process, not just by the council resolutions that were made in 2019, I think it was, that Nigel pointed out to, but also by the action of council officers. We need to lead by example, because we were already and are ahead of the game. And we need to stay ahead of the game because, again, we are leaders in our community in this space. And it's going to be very, very hard to us to point the finger at the rest of our community and say, guys, you need to pull finger as well, because we all know that that's the next big hurdle here, without us being able to point to our own situation and say, we've done it, it's doable. Yes, it's a bit of work, but the reality is this is business as usual. This isn't just an emergency or a climate. This now needs to be incorporated as business as usual, which this council is doing. The next thing to us is to bring and encourage our communities with us. My view is we need to be aspirational, but realistic, taking on board what Councillor Cooper said as well. That's why I was talking about the offsets. To me, the offsets for us will be the stuff that just mops up the real hard stuff that perhaps we just can't sort out. After saying that, there may be new technologies in place that will be able to replace those things, and we can always revise these things further on down the track. Very, very supportive of this, and very glad that, well, hopefully we get some support from council table with regards to this aspirational approach. Thank you very much.
Who's next? I'm not seeing a red light, Steffi. Glenn, Councillor Cooper.
Flashing. Can I ask? Am I allowed to ask a question, or am I making debate? My question would be, because this is a new. Are those C and D achievable? And the are they the same? Oh, brilliant. Okay, great.
Yeah, they're the same as the so the changes are tracked
Great.
so that you can see what were the original recommendations.
Oh, so they're the same targets. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Great. I think the reductions that we've achieved so far are outstanding, and it's a testament to the team. To I think it was 85% before it was adjusted or thereabouts. So that's absolutely fabulous. And I think it's good to be aspirational, and we should be leaders and good citizens. Can I just ask that when these are voted on, if they are done individually, because I'd like to support some, and I'd like to not
In
support
fact, if you
others.
request that, I have to do it.
Oh, great. Could you
Councillor
please?
Cooper.
Because I'm not, I like smart objectives, and I like, yeah, so I'd like to support some of this, but not all of it. So if it could be done individually, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
No problem. Mr. Larissy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, in support of Councillor Hanford's goals here, as were 70% of the voter base in the Paekākōriki Raumati ward, I would say. Agree with the aspiration here. I think that it's aspirational. Aside from Councillor Hanford's reasoning for this, there's another reason to support this, because there's two different things that are connected. One is the district-wide net emission target, and the other's the organisational one. And my concern is if we go to the community and decide that the district-wide one should be 2040 and the organisational one should be 2050, I'm sorry, but we look like a bunch of hypocrites. And I don't think that that's wise or very useful, and it doesn't build trust in the community. If we decide that 2050 is the one here, it's likely that the aspiration for the district-wide target as 2040 is going to be squashed. It sort of predetermines it. Saying that it's aspirational doesn't make it a hard goal. It's saying that it's something that we're aiming for. We might not quite make it, but it's what we're kind of aiming for. And I think that's important to keep in mind. I think setting an aspiration for 2040 is appropriate. It's correct. It reflects the views of much of the community that I see, and we should support it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I completely agree with aspirational targets and leadership in this space. I will just make a comment that I think as we do this as an organisation, we need to be cognizant of the costs that will place on our community due to the costs of implementation of this, and we are directly ratepayer funded. In our conversations earlier in this meeting, we talked about our rates, we talked about our annual plan, and in both of those we signalled that we're not happy with the increases of rates continuing at the percentages that they are. As we set these aspirational targets and discuss how they will be implemented, I would remind and encourage our council that we also are in the middle of a cost of living crisis that has impact on our families and our children and our rangatahi in this district. And so we need to be cognizant of the costs that we then are asking for our organisational goals that our community has to then pay for. So those are my only comments in relation to this as we move forward with the debate.
Thank you. Councillor Coe.
Thank you. Look, I'd like to just, re-emphasise that we need to distinguish between organisational, corporate objectives and district objectives, and look at where we can get the best bang for buck, following in on what Councillor Kirby has said, because we do have limited resources. We need to get to these targets as quickly as we possibly can. Our ultimate aim should be to look at our district-wide emissions, and I think when we get down to the hard end of our corporate emissions, we need to really be asking, what is the best use of our resources? Is it to get to that net zero position within our corporate emissions, or would those resources be better spent trying to drive down our district-wide emissions? And I think that's a question we need to look at quite seriously in terms of those those implications for rates. But I think also, you know, we need to be getting the easy wins here. You know, what are the things we can do really quickly and easily, and how fast can we do them? You know, can we really just say we've got to do these things as quickly as we possibly can, and you know, bearing in mind the cost effectiveness of the actions that we're taking compared to alternative uses of those funds. And I think we can get hung up on target dates or, you know, target percentages or whatever, when really the aim here is to just go down this path as quickly as we possibly can while keeping that balance between costs and benefits. So, you know, we do need to send clear signals, but I think, you know, our focus really should be on district emissions, not just on our own corporate emissions, and, you know, how can we achieve both of those cost effectively?
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Kim?
Yes, I support the motion. Just a couple of things. With iwi, anything that is an initiative to protect the environment is always going to get a big tick. So that's just a no-brainer. And I'm glad that we are leading, because as a council, we should be leading the way in this area. But I'm just going to talk about the balance between achievability and setting targets that are achievable and aspirational, because that's, to me, they're at the opposite end of the spectrum. I don't see why we can't set a higher target. I don't see why we always get caught up in, let's set a target that we can achieve, and if we think we're not going to achieve it, let's push it out. You know, why not set a target that's aspirational? If we don't achieve it, we don't achieve it, but we might get really, really close to it. You know, let's not be afraid to set an aspirational target just because someone might say, oh, you didn't get it, you didn't hit it. Because if you set a low bar, you'll definitely get it. If you set a high bar, you might not get it, but you might come really, really close. So it's about being brave and taking those steps. And I know a lot of work goes into this and a lot of thought goes into this, but it's about actually changing the way we think and saying, you know what, we're going to go for it. We're just going to go for it. And we might not get it, and being able to face up to that when we don't get it, but saying, hey, we didn't get 100, but we got 99.9. You know, and even that in itself is an achievement. I do agree we've got to balance up the cost when we get to the hard end, but, you know, it's irresponsible of us not to, and we're not going to not look at the cost benefit when we get to that crunch mode. So that's, you know, to me, that's not really an issue, because I'm confident that the staff and the council won't let that happen. But yeah, I think we should go aspirational, so I support it.
Thank you. Mr. Butler.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just, you know, listening to the people around the table, there's fantastic support for this, which is great to see, because in agreeing with Kim Tahui's comments there, we should be, you know, being aspirational and leading the way. Having been involved in the Takatai Kapiti process, it's actually quite plain to see what some of the long-term costs are going to be if we do nothing. When you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of homes being displaced or affected or changed, whether you have to do soft engineering, hard engineering, or retreat, those costs are massive as well. So there's no perfect solution in terms of how we go about this, and no ratepayer wants to, and no taxpayer around the country as well wants to pay for everything that may be coming. But we do have to be aspirational to actually show the way. And exactly what Councillor Coe was saying is that we want to be getting the district down as well as ourselves. So certainly from the Otaki Community Board's point of view, we certainly fully support these recommendations.
Thank you. Mr. Mansell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I take a slightly different approach, being politically cynical. Aspirational in the last few years has become an excuse for not achieving. I think that all goals should be measurable, and reasons for not achieving those goals should be able to be articulated. So I would prefer that the word aspirational be taken out of A. You set a goal, and if you don't have it, then perhaps you can explain why you didn't reach it. So that's my 2 pence worth. You don't set aspirational goals, or you don't tell people they're aspirational, because then it becomes an excuse not to achieve.
Just waiting for the microphone, so Councillor Coford, can you have this?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think the aspirational approach is pretty good for 2040, and the recommendations generally are incredibly, good. But I'd just ask for a bit of flexibility with council contractors, and that they're given a little bit of time and flexibility to come on and with this program, on the basis that we want to allow fair tendering and good tendering processes. And I can see this might sort of inhibit that. Thank you.
Thank you, good point. Councillor Pravanov.
I thank you through the chair. As you all know, I'm the chair of the Climate and Environment Subcommittee. A similar recommendation was raised at that subcommittee as to A, and there was very lively debate for probably half an hour on this matter, and at the end of the day I had to make a casting vote to not bring it to today's meeting. And the reason, I think, so in terms of from that subcommittee, there is a very strong desire to go faster than slower, but I suppose the message that we got from council staff was the cost of this. I do agree that bringing it forward is actually a really good message to our community, particularly when we start setting the objectives and targets for them. So I will be supporting this change in recommendations.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more light. Oh, Councillor Wilson, have you already spoken?
Briefly.
Yes. No, and I'm not taking speakers twice. I've had another request as well. So I'll just say a few things before I pass it back to Councillor Hanford for her right of reply. First of all, the message that I got from staff at the subcommittee was not the cost, not so much the cost, but the achievability in terms of bringing emissions down faster. So I think those who voted to keep it at 2050 were along the lines of what Mr. Mansell has pointed out, something that we think we can actually achieve at this point. But what I've heard from Councillor Hanford and others is that we don't know what we're able to achieve through extra work, through extra innovation. And the message that we're sending is that we want to do more work to work out a work program for an achievable 2040 target, if at all possible. We're not able to make that a real target right now because we haven't worked out how we're going to get there. But what we're signalling is that that's where we want to get to. And we'll work out the how as we go along. The other thing is that the original 2025 was set in the same way and led to a flurry of work in this area. It was aspirational at the time, very aspirational at the time. And what I mean was that it was aspirational with not a clear pathway about how we were going to get there, but a message that that's where we wanted to get to. And that's what we're resetting today, once we know more, once we've done more work. And there's no reason why that can't happen further down the track in terms of this goal as well. The main thing is that we've got this midterm goal, which is measurable and achievable, which we are not so much focused on during the debate, but to me is the really important piece of work in all of this, and which is going to make some real change in the next few years. So I want to thank council staff for the huge amount of work that's gone into working out how we can get to there, and then some more long-term thinking about how we can reach targets further down the track. And I'd like to acknowledge the work that's gone on over the years in this organisation, since Jake Roos was on our staff and before, to get us to the point that we are now, where the low-hanging fruit is pretty much gone. And we're now having to really get creative and innovative, as Councillor Hanford said, to get us further down in terms of our emissions. So with that, I'll pass to Councillor Hanford for a right of reply.
Well, I just had a question in relation to the amendment.
There's no questions, and we've all
It's in
had a
relation-
chance at debate, and I'm passing to Councillor Hanford for a right of reply. Thank you.
But just just seconding the Mayor's acknowledgements of council staff who have been involved both presently and some who I understand have left us or will be leaving us soon, and just acknowledging the enormous amount of passion and expertise that you bring to the mahi that you do in this space, which is desperately needed. So yeah, really important. And I total the Mayor's comments too around the midterm reduction target for category 1 and 2 emissions of 15.5% by 2032. That's, that in itself is leadership. And so I think this 2040 aspirational target, which again, thank you for kind of working with me to figure out some wording that would work in terms of what would both be something we could practically and tangibly work towards, and also reflects the aspiration that we're seeking to cultivate in the community, is really awesome. So yeah, again, I think it just underscores the importance of urgent and meaningful measures to reduce emissions, the importance of collaboration and innovation, as the Mayor has talked to. And I agree completely with Councillor Coe around district-wide emissions being a vital part of this conversation. And if we want the district-wide conversations that we're having to also be aspirational, I think we need to be in that same space ourselves, so that we're, truly kind of standing with integrity in that space. So, thanks for all of your contributions and the support around this.
Thank you. So I'll put this to the vote now. All in favour, please.
Sorry, point of order. I've been trying to make an amendment to the amendment.
Are you moving an amendment?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I was trying to do that ages ago. It could have been,
Sorry,
been
I thought
much shorter.
you-
But anyway, okay. So the amendment to amendment, and I can do that because I'm not a seconder to the original amendment. If I was, I couldn't.
Sorry, my apologies. I didn't realise you were moving an amendment.
Okay.
I thought you
So
were trying to
the
debate
amendment
again.
taking on board what Richard has said about taking out the word aspirational. I agree with that 100%. We're having an aspirational discussion, but we don't want to go all Easter Bunny about it. So take it on. So my amendment to the amendment is that council sets a new long-term target for its organisational emissions. So I just take out aspirational. We know it's aspirational, but it has to be a target.
Okay, don't debate it. First
Right.
of all, I'll see if we've got a seconder, and then we'll have debate. So do I have a seconder for the amendment to take out the word aspirational?
Just to clarify, if that fails, it'll just go back to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't second it because you're a mover of the original motion, and nor can Councillor Halliday because he's the seconder of the original motion. Do I have another seconder for that? Seconded by Kim Tahiwi. Oh, actually, you can't second because it's a council meeting, not a. So,
That's correct.
are you wanting to second, Councillor Brovanov? Okay, seconded by Councillor Brovanov. Right of introduction, Councillor Wilson.
Oh, I kind of did it really. Let's just keep these things. Let's keep these things as real as possible. It becomes an actual target that way, and if it's not met, it's not met. It can be changed. But it's not aspirational. It's an actual. That makes it now an actual target.
No. Any further debate? Councillor Halliday, you have your hand up. Are you wanting to contribute to the debate?
Yeah, I'll just, Madam
Councillor
Chair.
Halliday first online.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
I've gone red.
In a controlled way, I have been waving my hand in the chat room for about the last 10 minutes,
Yeah,
and I've been ignored.
hybrid meetings are extremely
This doesn't
challenging.
need to be this doesn't need to be an amendment. It can just be the mover making an alteration to the recommendation.
I disagree with that because we've already had debate on the original motion and people haven't had a chance to respond to this change. If it was suggested when the motion was first moved and seconded, then people could debate this. What we've debated is something else. So I think the right course of action, which is the track we've gone down anyway, is for this to be moved and seconded and then debated, and then we'll decide whether we want the word aspirational or not. Do you have
Could I
anything
ask,
further to contribute to
Councillor-
the debate?
Could I ask
We have
Councillor
moved and
Wilson to
seconded
just-
an amendment. We are now debating the amendment. Do you have any further contribution to the debate?
I would have liked to have actually contributed to the last one.
You
But
did.
I asked to make this this alteration before the recommendation was moved by Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, so
could I
you
just
can't
ask
move an
council
amendment
officers to
because you
please keep an
seconded.
eye
Councillor
on the
Councillor
screen so that I
Halliday,
get due process as well would be much appreciated.
Councillor Halliday, you can't move an amendment because you seconded the original motion. And by the time you
I was
suggested it, we'd had quite a bit of debate on the original motion anyway. So it was too late for the mover and seconder to change the original motion when we're midway through the debate. At that point, it needs to be an amendment so that everybody can have a chance to participate in the debate. Is that clear?
Happy to accept that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday, but good point. And
could I just
yeah,
ask
as
for a
I
moment
said, these hybrid
of
meetings are really challenging. So my apologies if you feel like you've been waiting or frustrated. Yeah, it's just really challenging. You're behind me in a very small box on the screen.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. That's why you have the officer on your right-hand side. Could I just ask for a moment to, could someone type up, or could Nigel just reread what he's proposing, please?
So it's the, I can
Is
clarify that.
that been corrected on
I
the
can
screen?
clarify that, or I can get Democracy Services to do that. It's basically what you see on the screen,
No, I can see it here.
except with the word aspirational removed.
Could I ask for an amendment to that, or a word to be added, or would that have to be an additional amendment?
Yeah, you can't move an amendment as a seconder to the original motion, I'm afraid, Councillor Halliday.
Okay, I just wanted to add the word aspirational back into it a bit later in the sentence. That was all.
No, I think we're debating now the amendment to remove the word aspirational. If that fails, the word aspirational will just go back in again. Councillor Cofford.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Halliday stole my act, I think. Through you, Madam Chair, we have brought forward this time from 2000. Oh, we've gone ahead, haven't we, to 2040. Look, just going back to my request for flexibility for council contractors, I was just wondering if we could keep aspirational in. Thank you.
Yeah, so you're debating against the motion. I mean, against the amendment. Councillor Cooper?
Yeah, just my comment would be that I was in the sustainability meeting as well, and this was discussed about bringing these targets forward, and it was quite clear from Mr. Mendoza that, or certainly from paid staff, council staff, that this would be not achievable. That was my understanding of the conversation. Others might have a different memory of it. This is not achievable. And I don't think it's good governance to be setting direction for the council, because this will be telling council, you go off and do all this work if it's not achievable. And I don't think it's good governance. I think it's unfair on the CE, and I think it's unfair on the staff, that when they go off and do this work and come back and go, it's going to cost X amount of dollars, which means your rates will go next year from 7.8% to 14%, and then we go, we're not happy with that, we're not going to put rates up 14% to get to net zero. And all that hard work is then, so I think we're sending, by making a directive, we're being really unfair on our council staff. And I won't be voting for it, based on a couple of reasons. That's one of them.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Kirby, we're just waiting for his microphone.
I agree with what Councillor Cooper has said. I think aspirational needs to stay there, because otherwise we send too strong a signal to staff, and it doesn't take into account some of the conversations that we as councillors still want to have in this space. in terms of the things that I raised in the debate on the original motion, around the cost on our ratepayers, all of that kind of conversation, the implications for our businesses that look to contract work from us, and the wider conversation around our community-wide, district-wide emissions. I think by sending a strong signal like this in terms of this is our new target, those debates don't really have room to take place to the degree that I think they need to and that our community deserves to have.
Thank you. Councillor Coe.
Yeah, look, I want to support Councillor Cooper and Councillor Kirby. I think we're getting a bit carried away here in terms of the use of our limited resources and the impact on rates. And I think there is an acknowledgement we need to go hard and fast down this path, but we need to be aware of the consequences of that. And I think we need to bring the district along with us. Our focus here is on corporate emissions. Yes, that's great, and we need to show leadership, but really there's a lot of easy wins to be had in terms of getting those district emissions down, and I'd like to make that our focus rather than just what we do within our own business here. So I don't support, in fact, I really don't support A as it is at all, with or without aspirational. Thank you.
So before we go to a right of reply on the amendment, I'd just like to contribute that I've just got kind of resonating in my mind what Mr. Mansell said about targets being achievable and deliverable with measurable outcomes. And without the word aspirational, we're setting a target where we don't know the cost, we don't know how we're going to get there, we don't know how we're going to measure progress against that goal. So, but I support. So I don't think removing the word. I don't think keeping the word aspirational in weakens this at all. I think it still sends a message that that's what we want to achieve. It's just acknowledging that we don't know how we're going to get there, and it's also showing respect for staff who've worked quite hard on that 2050 target. So I won't be supporting this amendment today, and I'll pass on to Councillor Wilson for his right of reply.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to die in a ditch over it. It's as long as the aim is a real aim. We set targets all the time for all sorts of things, and they're moving targets because things change. Get a couple of Hawke's Bay events, and suddenly everybody will go, "Oh my God, why didn't you do this earlier? Why didn't you ramp this up?" That's all it takes to change one single event, and it massively changes everybody's mindset. So I'm cool either way; it doesn't really matter. But as long as the thinking behind what we're trying to do is maintained. So why don't I just given the flavour of it, why don't I just withdraw that and we'll just go back to what A was?
Well, the seconder would have to agree to that too.
Yeah. Good.
I will agree to that. The reason I seconded it so we could have the debate.
Thank you. So is that just checking in with Dem Services? I haven't had that situation before. Is that an acceptable thing to do?
It's a majority in agreement.
So do we have to put that to a vote?
No, it's just withdrawn.
Yeah, it's just withdrawn. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back to the original motions now. I've had Councillor Cooper request that these are taken separately, so we'll do that now. So we have A, and the wording that I read out earlier. Been moved and seconded. All in favour, please say aye. That's carried. I'll note that we've already had debate on all of these, so we're not going to further litigate them. We're just going to now take them separately. So, would you like a division? Okay. All in favour of A?
I'm just going to go through my list so that
Put your hand down.
Councillor Warwick. 4. Wilson, 4. 4. 4. QB 4. Bishop 4. Those against?
Against? I think it's probably fair to note that the people who are against it still support a carbon emission strategy, just not the date, I would presume. So against, please raise your hands.
Spies. Halliday.
My focus on District 1.
Sure.
Okay.
Councillor Kay.
And now he's 4. Now he's 4.
So Martin was for the motion. Councillor Halliday was for the motion, just to clarify for the Chief Executive's notes.
Thank you.
Have you got all that?
Yes.
You've got the against?
Yep.
Great, so that's carried. B. All in favour? Please say aye. Aye. Against? Would you like a division? Okay. All in favour, please
favour.
raise your hand.
I got it.
I think you've got to do it this way.
Councillor Warwick.
So Councillor Halliday is for as well.
Councillor Wilson.
It's okay. He's got a card which makes it easier.
Varnoff. Coford. QB. Hanford. Halliday in favour. And your worship. Thank you.
Against? Coops.
Okay. Spires, Co and Cooper. Thank you.
Thanks for the heads up, Councillor Spires. C. Can we call it back to order? No, I've been asked to take them separately, so that's what we're doing. C. All in favour? Aye.
C.
Against? That's carried. Does anybody want a division? No. D. All in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. E. All in favour? Aye. Against? Anybody calling for a division? No. F. All in favour? Please say aye. Aye. Against? G. All in favour? Please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. So now we'll move on to H. I have a suggested amended wording which might help us get through this in a bit more of a streamlined way. So I haven't had time to give it to Democracy Services. So this is H and I would like to put the words at the top. That the council notes the following recommendations from the Climate and Environment Committee, subcommittee. So we're noting their recommendations. We're not committing ourselves to anything at this point. That's just reflecting what's in the papers, but drawing it into the recommendation. So I'm going to move all of that. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. So right of introduction. I'll take that. So the purpose of moving an amended recommendation today is to acknowledge that these are some ideas that came up through the subcommittee for our future consideration. We don't need to consider them today. We don't need to do any particular piece of work around any of them. All we're doing is noting them as possible future pieces of work. And the reason that I supported bringing them through is because the purpose of those subcommittees is for people who have a particular interest in those areas to bring their ideas through. And all we're doing is acknowledging the ideas that have come through that committee for possible ways that we could reach that 2040 aspirational goal. Because we're going to need to think a bit big. So these are some ideas about how we might get there. And all we're doing today is acknowledging that we've had these suggestions that we can work on in the future if we decide to. So next we have Councillor Coe.
I did signal that earlier that I would like to propose some changes to this section, and I think, well, I've had some comments from a member of the community, Andy Langley in particular, around light vehicles, and I don't think we need the dates in there. I think what we need to signal is we need to do some work on how quickly we can change to being fully EV with our light vehicle fleet. Let's not put a date in there. It's we may be able to do it much earlier than that. So again, it comes back to that cost-benefit analysis, and same with the fossil gas. That date is just going to be a red herring. Again, it's can we look at how quickly we can eliminate fossil gas and come up with something that's realistic. It just needs a bit of thought put into both of those as to how quickly we can go down that path with our available resources without impacting too heavily on rates, etc. So I would like to propose a change in wording to part 1 and part 2 that signals that intention, but with the removal of a date.
So as the mover, I wouldn't accept a change in wording to that effect, namely because this is the recommendation that we're noting. That's what came up through the subcommittee.
Right.
So to me, wordsmithing these means that's not true, because that's not what they recommended. We can change those things later if we decide to do that piece of work. But for now, all we're doing is acknowledging.
Procedurally, yes, I
yeah.
can see that.
So I wouldn't accept as the mover. So if you did want to propose an amendment, you can do that. But
can we in that case add a different recommendation?
I don't want to debate it without having moved and seconded an amendment or anything like that. But I'll just point out that these are these are the words that came up from the subcommittee, and all we're saying is we're acknowledging these words that have come up from the subcommittee and these proposed pieces of work. If we change them, it's kind of nonsensical, because that's not what they said. We're noting what they said.
But then how did those recommendations then get implemented? How do they move forward if the council does not accept them?
We're not saying we're going to progress them. This is a noting. We're noting the recommendations from the subcommittee.
So that has no effect then?
Well, you can vote for or against it, but so just checking in. Are you still wanting to move an amendment, or because I'm not accepting it?
I mean, it just goes nowhere if we're just noting it. Is that what we want?
It goes on the public record for us to bring up in our further conversations later.
Should we be?
Okay, we're in debate. So finish what you want to say about these recommendations. They are as they are, or move an amendment.
I'll have to think about what the amendment would be, but I just think that noting recommendations is going to just go nowhere. We need to be a bit more proactive than that, particularly around the light vehicle fleet. I'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Councillor Wilson.
Yep. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this has only become noting because it's been amended to become noting. The original H was actually a recommendation, right? So if that is the case, then you would presume that that the council has the right to debate the recommendation. That in itself then raises a bigger issue, actually, and that is how the effectiveness, the real effectiveness of subcommittees. So when those subcommittees are bringing something through to council, and then council's going to be workshopping their recommendations, it kind of undervalues those subcommittees, I think, in terms of them making recommendations. So if we're just noting it, then it's just being noted, and that's what the amendment says. But otherwise, if we were if we were debating the recommendation itself, then I agree with what a lot of Councillor Coe was saying. But again, I'm not sure, and perhaps somebody could clarify for me, if the intent of this is to look at the broader society's emissions and not just councils. It just seems like there's an extraordinary focus on what this organisation is doing, and even though this is quite a big organisation, it's only it's a relatively small part of the bigger thing. And what are we doing to address the broader stuff? But again, if this is now, so it's an amendment that's just noting. Is that what's happening? Was that seconded?
We're in debate.
Yeah. Okay. That's...
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you for making these suggestions. As the chair of the subcommittee, I have received the draft minutes of that meeting, and council staff have been looking to see what wording was actually used, and in F, the word was to recommend to council. I'll get council staff to clarify that, whereas the second one, where I is actually as it was written in the amended minutes. So if council staff, the problem is my iPad is broken, so I'm dealing with this on my phone and I can't actually open the document myself. So I need to rely on council staff to provide the actual wording that's in the draft minutes of that meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, they're bringing that for us now. Thank you, Councillor Pravanov. Councillor Halliday. Councillor Halliday? So we're trying to do a few things at once up here. Yeah, we're coming to him.
Thank you. I've just been unmuted. I raised a point of order at 11:55, Madam Chair, through the chat.
What's your point of order, Councillor Halliday?
That was a point of clarity.
That's different from a point of order. Are you
I was
calling a
under the-
point of order, or are you wanting some
I was
clarification,
under the
which is
impression-
actually a question?
I was under the impression that through points of order I could ask for clarity. Is that incorrect? I appreciate that
I'm
we're in
just getting
debate.
some clarity on that. So Councillor Halliday, just shoot. What is it you want to know?
Hopefully I can offer a little bit of a solution here. Correct. If I could just get some clarity, Madam Chair, on what you're proposing. Being a chair of a subcommittee as well, I appreciate the comments that are being made. It's my understanding that what we have here are suggestions that need further discussion from a subcommittee. I would pick that this is not the forum for that. What I would suggest is that that forum would potentially be a workshop where these and other suggestions or considerations could be talked about in relation to this particular paper, rather than discussing it here as such. I note what Councillor Wilson was just saying about that the council notes the following recommendations, but we do need some sort of platform or forum, if you like, to discuss these. And I would perhaps suggest that a workshop might be the appropriate thing for that. as a follow-up to this meeting as such. I'll have the same issue ongoing with regards to housing and other issues as well, that there'll be recommendations that will come from our subcommittees to these committees that perhaps, and we are working to establish new ways of doing business, if you like. What I think this is highlighting is just maybe a bit of a gap in our current process, not taking anything away from what's trying to be achieved here. I'm just wondering if the solution here is to acknowledge that these recommendations have come through and need to be workshopped as part of the development or ongoing development of the kaupapa of this particular situation around climate change and our answers to it as such. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. Next we have, well, Councillor Coe's already contributed to the debate.
Could I have an answer?
No, what was the question? I don't, and anyway, we're not in question time, we're in debate.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to, Councillor Pravanov has already contributed, Councillor Coe has already contributed. I'm going to put this motion, which has been moved and seconded. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against. Against. Do you want a division? No, it's been voted on, sorry. Well, my apologies that didn't happen, but it's now been voted on. So, is anybody calling for a division? Yeah. All in favour, please raise your hand. It's not a perfect world.
Councillor Coburn, Jimmy Kirby, Worship, Councillor Wilson,
All against?
Councillor Warwick, Councillor Coe, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Spires, Councillor Halliday.
Right. Okay, we have an additional motion that you're proposing. It's not a recommendation. Okay, Councillor Coe's moving a motion. Could you turn her microphone on, please? No, it's not on, it's green.
I've got something before you do that. I've got to sell 5 apiece because I haven't got a vote from Councillor Pravanov.
Oh, Councillor Pravanov, did you vote? On the last motion, did you vote for or against? Because yours is actually the deciding vote, as it turns out. Did you say aye or nay? Just say aye or no. That's all you. We're voting. We're not debating. So do you want to say your aye or nay into the microphone?
Yeah, we're having some technical difficulties. We're sorry.
We're having some technical difficulties. Do you want to just say aye? Or? Okay, she's abstaining, which gives me the casting vote, and I'll vote in favour. Okay, now we've got an additional motion from Liz Coe.
I have council received, and I'm still on it. Sorry, we've got microphone issues. It says everyone's muted, and we can't fix it.
So I can just repeat what you say, if you just want to say it. She'd like to move, Councillor Coe. So the motion is that council receive a report.
Receive a report from staff on the possible future initiatives recommended by the Climate Environment Subcommittee.
So that's in addition to what they've provided in the agenda, which already responds to those initiatives. Paragraphs 25 through 32, I think it was. So it's in addition to that, Councillor Coe? So there are some responses in the agenda. We can always request a report at any time, but asking for a report on some of these initiatives which have already been identified as unlikely to proceed would be not a good expenditure of resource, I don't think. I think we can trust that we'll progress some of these as we go forward, and that we'll respect the views of the subcommittee. But feel free to continue with the motion if you still want to.
I guess my main concern is that I feel that noting recommendations from the Climate Environment Subcommittee depowers the recommendations coming through from that committee.
Well, what about an additional motion that says something like, Council will investigate these options further as it progresses its climate emissions work?
And in particular, whether just how feasible those target dates are. I'm sorry, I don't have exact words, but
And explore the feasibility of some of the timeframes suggested. Have you got that? So I'll say that more slowly.
We need to get IT over, we can't get it to work.
So we might need to adjourn the meeting actually, because the microphones have stopped working. So we're going to adjourn the meeting. Maybe we'll take our lunch break now actually, seeing as we're adjourning anyway. Is lunch there?
Almost.
So yeah, we'll break for half an hour because I think we need a bit of a break anyway. And we'll come back with some wording around that motion. Yeah. And yeah, because I think, yeah, it's a good suggestion to identify some kind of progress that we're going to make around these. Okay, so we'll come back at 20 to 1.